Hi everybody, good evening. Hopefully everybody made it here safely in the rain. We are really excited to have you all here. My name is Tolga. I am the CEO of PARC, and I want to welcome you all to PARC and PARC Forum. We have an amazing topic today that hopefully is interest to everybody in the room. It's clearly an area and a topic that's very close to my heart. And we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and the cutting edge of AI. And without further ado, I just want to introduce our moderator, Alan Sapkan.
Thanks, Olga. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome. How's everyone doing? Good? All right, good. I'm glad that everyone made it safe. This is an excellent topic. We're really excited to share it with you. My name is Alan Sapkan. I am a polymath. I'm a host and producer of a bunch of different things, including a science comedy show, a future festival, and a fireside chat series where I ask really smart people some of the world's most thought-provoking questions, and AI is definitely in that category. So we're really excited. Can we get a little bit of excitement from the audience? Yeah? All right, good. Awesome, awesome. So I'll go ahead and introduce everyone, and we'll just jump right off into the questions. So the first person that you see on our panel is Piero. Piero is a cultural historian with a background in artificial intelligence. Then next up on our panel is Maya. Maya focuses on computational creativity. Really excited for that. And then we have Tolga, who's the CEO of PARC, and he has a background in AI as well. And then lastly, we have Andra right here, who is the managing director of Silicon Valley Robotics. All right, so I think that we all know that everything is now being called AI, AI this, AI that. What's the difference? When does an algorithm even become AI? And what are some very relatable ways for us to understand the way that we use AI in the daily lives?
I can start. I'm the skeptic here. So those in the audience who know me, they know that I never liked the term artificial intelligence. And today more than ever, there's never been a definition. You know, I wrote down the definitions that McCarthy, Minsky gave, and you read them, they don't say much about when does a piece of software become artificial intelligence. So when AI is not popular, nothing is artificial intelligence. When AI is popular, pretty much everything is artificial intelligence. I spend half of my time in China, where AI is more popular than here, and now I've seen AI hotels. There's an AI store at the Shanghai airport. I mean, very soon the clock will be AI. So it's actually a serious question. I mean, yeah. When does a piece of software become more than just a piece of software, right? And
yeah? So I was asked to teach artificial intelligence at Santa Clara University, where I'm a professor. So I had to go back and look at what AI is, because of course I've noticed that the definition is used very loosely. Last year, I remember somebody came to visit my Computational Creativity course to give an overview of AI, and they started back with Alan Turing, essentially defining computer science, which was very disorienting, because we want AI to be something well-defined, not just equivalent to computer science. Broadly speaking, it originally included very heavily things like logic. So logic was considered part of AI, especially when it's applied to computer science. Robotics have been part of AI for a very long time. There are parts of AI that nobody knows about, such as game theory, which has very heavy theory behind it. More recently, we hear AI being equivalent to machine learning and data science, which it's not. And that can be a little bit frustrating, because machine learning, especially deep learning, is very popular. It's a very popular part of artificial intelligence, but it doesn't make it artificial intelligence. My favorite part of AI is computational creativity, which is looking at making computers that are creative in their own right, or machine collaborators that work with us on creative tasks, perhaps in a way that's similar to how we might collaborate with another human. So there are lots and lots of parts to AI, and it doesn't encompass all of computer science, and it's not just machine learning.
Yeah, and it's also, in a sense, the definition is shifting. because McCarthy was right to complain when it works, it's no longer AI. Like chess programs. Like chess was one of the great problems of AI. Once it was solved, now you can buy chess programs for a few dollars. In fact, probably free online. Nobody thinks that's AI anymore because this problem has been solved.
But it is technically, because it's an expert system, and expert systems are part of AI. It's just not hot, exciting AI anymore. So I guess people don't call it that as often. That makes sense.
That's actually the same problem that we have with robotics, where once it starts working, it's no longer a robot. It's a product. So, you know, those robots don't work in demos, as I believe some people found out at CES this year. It's well known. But when we started our association, which was started by robotics companies to support robotics, I had to very seriously try to identify what we called robotics. You know, it started with a certain group of companies, but companies change. And the makeup of the companies in our association has gone through a lot of change in, you know, 8 to 10 short years. And one of the reasons for that is that there are now a lot of emerging industries, a lot of emerging startups in the field of robotics because of the advances in a whole range of physical technologies and supporting software technologies. But to me, the definition of robotics, I would often look at who's building it. Because if you tracked through the career arc of certain people who were very clearly robotics people, they'd work on quite a range of different things. So one woman who's very famous, whose name will come to me in a second, went from building surgical robots and robot hands, very sophisticated ones in Japan, to working on the Nest thermostat, to starting the Google X Prize,
awesome,
to being on the board at Twitter. Another famous person who won the autonomous vehicle first second DARPA challenge, then started working on online multi-person courses. They've still got a background in robotics and AI, and those technologies clearly have very wide application areas. But I'll just take one comment that you made is that robotics and AI are really close and have been for a long time. Absolutely. But robotics came first.
Let's get that straight.
You know, so if we're talking about the kind of creation story about robotics and AI, it was in the pursuit of what was supposed to be an easily solved problem. Let's just build robots that can think. And, you know, no problem. So we'll build AI to be the brains of these robots that we want to build. And of course, it turned out that just building the AI was so much more complicated. We could build quite simple robot arms, and they were good for a lot of factory chores. And that's been the state of the industry for 50 years. Meanwhile, we started to put computers into everything. So AI has had so many more opportunities to flourish. And here's the point. Right now, this is the tipping point. Because robotics started AI. At the moment, AI is on top and robotics is just starting to emerge. AI is going to become dependent on robotics again, because you can't have AI without all of the automation and without the sensors to get your data. And what are the best, you know, I believe we've kind of saturated where computers, screens, and where mobile phones go. So it's going to be our robots and our robot products that are the next generation of getting AI out into the world.
And what's your scope of the definition for robots? Do you think about just robots as in science fiction movies? Robots is your Nest thermostat example of robot?
I actually think the Nest thermostat is because it's often connected with other devices.
Okay.
So if we go to the pure definition of robotics, which is a machine that senses, thinks, and acts, then we've reached the stage where our microwaves are robots. Our cars are definitely already robots, even if we do a lot of the steering. The car is doing a lot of the other calculations and sensing. So the brakes get applied the way the car thinks the brakes should be applied, not necessarily the way that we think. Ditto the gear changes. And we're incrementally increasing the amount of autonomy that's given. But I think you have to look at it that way. When we talk about autonomous driving, we think of the car as the whole system, whereas it's a set of subsystems, many of which are actually autonomously sensing, thinking, and acting already. We have an industrial definition of robotics, which relates to movement in 3 axes, partial programming and partial autonomy. Now, I think movement in 3 axes is stereotypically a robot arm, but we have a lot of autonomous vehicles that are also robots. By some definition, the Roomba robot is too stupid to really be a robot, but it's getting smarter. And it was marketed as a robot, and it was built by roboticists. We just have an increasingly sophisticated expectation. And I really believe that our next household robot is our house, not the anthropomorphic idea of a robot being something like a person with a head and a body and arms and legs. So let's take that away. That's the tip of the iceberg, the humanoid robot idea. The rest is a lot of smart devices that aren't always objects. They can be environments as well.
I think what you're bringing up here is very interesting. This tendency to imagine that anything intelligent or creative or a robot has to be humanoid, and that the better it is, the more similar it is to us, is really ultimately misleading, because a lot of work, for example, in computational creativity that's very successful doesn't try to imitate us. Neural networks, even perhaps the hottest part of AI right now, doesn't actually try to imitate the way that human neural networks work. It was decades ago that they realized that if they try to imitate neural networks too closely to how human brains work, it doesn't actually lead to very good results. AI in general, and I guess robots in particular, do better when we let them be, in general, let them develop in a direction in which they are good, regardless of whether it happens to align with our strengths or weaknesses.
So I just want to say that we also have had a good amount of time, I guess, with, like you said, with the start of robotics, that was hardware-based, and then we transitioned to kind of more of a software-based, right? AI can be deployed as software, and within that, then it gets to live without hardware necessarily. And then now it's kind of coming back to the merger of needing a robot to, in many cases, in some cases. Maybe let's talk a little bit about how AI learns. How does AI learn, and then when does AI become smarter than humans? And is that an existential problem?
When does AI become? I mean, I think AI has been smarter than humans in many ways for a long time. It beat Kasparov at chess decades ago, and then we quickly declared that doesn't matter. The moment that right? The moment that computers can do something, we raise the bar, whether it's intelligence or creativity or perhaps anything else. Because fundamentally, as humans, we want to be the best at ideally everything, or at least everything that matters. So,
yeah, and I think we almost need to parse that question because we talk about AI as if it's one thing, and it applies to all the problems that we face. But clearly that's not the case. The question is, when does AI get better for what category of problems, with what characteristics, and when does AI still choke quite significantly on certain set of problems that humans are much more superior at. So I think if you go one level down and start kind of composing it into those categories of problems and the complexity, and where AI can help and where AI needs further improvement, is important way to think about that.
And even the whole idea of intelligence, there's still a lot of debate as to what that actually measures, and it's certainly not the whole measure of what it is to be human by any means. So when we're talking about the equivalences, we're taking a very kind of narrow slice and trying to fit that. And I like your suggestion that it's a little bit competitive too, because we want to win whatever that kind of battle is.
Yeah.
So I agree that your question needs to be parsed, because there's really two things there. One, you said something about learning, which is a loaded word, and the second one, you said something about machine being better than us. I think most machines, if not all of them, are built, exist, because they do something better than the average person. The clock is my favorite example. There's no human being, no matter how smart, that can tell us how many minutes and seconds we've been speaking. But that machines can do it. It was invented 1,000 years ago. So most machines do something better than humans can do. Where we win, we can do all of those things. Okay? We will not beat AlphaGo. But AlphaGo is an incredibly stupid machine. It can do only one thing. We don't have a name for a human being who can do only one thing and keeps doing it non-stop. AlphaGo right now is playing against itself, right? Non-stop, 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 non-stop. Well, we watch TV, we take a walk, we do many things. We can cross the street, we can do useful things. We can also invent machines, by the way. But in terms of a machine doing something better than us, I think that happens all the time. Can you run as fast as your car? So, you know.
But on the other hand, machines are ours. We make them, right? So in some sense, I mean, in a very real way, the whole advantage of being human is that we can make tools. And suddenly we are creating tools that are so amazing that we are intimidated by them and we are scared of them, which is a little bit amusing, actually, because they're here to help us.
But the second part, the learning part, that's the real question.
Well, we can discuss how it's done.
Does a dishwasher learn to do what it does? Not really. It's been, you know, there's a hardware thing there that makes it do. When can you say the machine actually learned to do something? So that's I think, a more complicated question to answer.
Well, we can try to address it if you guys want.
Yeah, please.
So older AI used to be more like the washing machine that you just mentioned. It was more about taking a process that we understand and putting it into a machine so that it could do it. So to give you a fun example, Harold Cohen, who unfortunately recently passed away, had a system named Aaron that could paint. He was a painter, and he created an automated artist that autonomously created paintings. Really beautiful pieces of art.
And this was a long time ago.
This was decades ago, yeah. This is before machine learning.
Because people think this only happened when Google started doing it.
Oh. No. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. That's right. So this is surprisingly little known. This is back when, before Photoshop, before it was easy to visualize things on a computer screen. Harold Cohen had this massive setup with robot arms that had paints in there that would move around, and it's a really sophisticated system just so you could put paint on paper to create this artwork. But these were expert systems. I think that they're fascinating. And I think in a way, it doesn't matter if it's an expert system, if it's doing something amazing. But we moved past it. Right now, I have a computer system, it's called Alicia, that I created precisely because I didn't know how to do something. So in the middle of my PhD, I started learning how to sing opera, because apparently doing a PhD in computer science was not enough to do.
We'll have to get a demo of that later.
Yeah, so as I learned how to sing and became semi-professional, at some point I decided, I was taking a bus, I remember this really vividly, I decided that I want to write original songs. And I suppose cocky as I was, doing my PhD and learning how to sing opera, I thought that I could write original songs, no problem. Let me just sit down and try to do it. And for 3 years, I couldn't figure out how to write a good melody. I could write melodies, but they were so bad, I could not imagine spending time producing them, spending time learning to perform them, because they were horrible. And it was when I was introduced to computational creativity that I decided to create a collaborator for myself that could help me come up with original melodies. So I wanted to give it lyrics and have it come up with original melodies for them. Now it's very important that, unlike Harold Cohen and David Cope, actually, who is I could talk about at length as well, he created these amazing pieces of music, but again, because he was a composer and he could put the rules into the computer, I couldn't do it. I wanted the machine to do something that I didn't know how to do. And we did. Within 3 months we had a prototype, and if you want to play with it, try alicia.com. You can compose with a system that was written by, largely by a person who cannot compose. I had a workshop where people were creating music with Alicia, and one of the students was insistent that she was collaborating with me. She wasn't collaborating with my system Alicia, which is absurd because she could not collaborate on composition with me because I don't know how to compose. All right, so we're really moving forward. Very briefly, the way that AI works, just in a few sentences, is it tries to predict. So the most prototypical example is predicting whether a certain stock is going to go up or down. So you look at a lot of historical data and you try to make educated guesses. Most simply, binary, yes or no, is it going to go up or down? Now when you look at generative systems like Elysium, we have to somehow take something that can predict, that's good at saying yes or no for a specific point, into something that can generate. So what you do with these AI generative systems is you try to predict what the next node is going to be. So you ask Elysia, in my case, what is the next node? And it's going to take a guess, and you simply agree with it. Then you ask it again, what is the next node? And you agree with it again.
With a certain confidence, it can predict.
That's right, but it's actually really interesting that in generative systems, the confidence doesn't become as important as it is in something like predicting stock value going up or down. Because the subjective nature of music makes it so that a system that's actually very good at predicting the next note might not be the one that you want to use to generate. Right? So it's a lesser known and more new part of artificial intelligence, where we have to deviate from some of the established standards in deep learning.
And we need that so much because, if you think about it, we're using AI to solve some of the world's largest problems based on historical data that we socially have agreed is describing conditions that we want to change and improve on. I can speak of things like gender equity, for example. So this is one of the biggest ethical issues that we run into. If we're building systems that are data-driven and are predicting based on that, we run into problems that are difficult to fix. And yet I don't see that we're using generative AI in any widespread fashion yet.
I heard of something related to this. I believe it was either credit scores. That once somebody looked into the AI system behind this credit score system, they realized that it was biasing against certain nationalities. Because if we're not careful, if we're not directing the way the AI is used, it could actually end up supporting some of the negative trends in our society.
Yep. Maybe before we get there, I want to ask about that. But Tolga, I want maybe to hear, and maybe you can teach some of the audience about what you guys are doing at PARC at this, high-level research and development in AI.
Yeah, I think AI now being as prominent as is fairly horizontal. So it touches on a lot of the things that we do one way or another. But I want to separate, there's applications of AI to various different problems in technology development, and then there's really thinking about AI and AI science and taking that to the next level as well. In that context, I want to talk, maybe mention a few areas that we're kind of exploring, the frontiers of science, if you will. One is in bringing transparency to AI, which we deem to be an extremely critical problem for further adoption of artificial intelligence. And that, roughly speaking, all these AI systems are black boxes and they operate in a black box fashion. You feed a bunch of data and then they learn what they learn, including the biases that's in the data, and then they make predictions, right? And when you ask why they come up with a certain set of recommendations, they can't tell you. And that poses a problem. That poses a problem in many dimensions, but primarily it poses a problem from establishing the right level of trust between a human agent and an AI agent, so that they can actually work very collaboratively with one another in solving these problems, whether that's composing music, painting, right? So we have a set of research activities that really looks at that transparency problem in AI, and then the next step of that naturally is, as you bring transparency into AI and eliminate that black box nature and build the trust, it opens a new frontier in terms of how to think about the science of human-machine collaboration. Mm-hmm. So it's not about pushing the limits of automation and pushing the limits of learning to push the AI to the next levels, but it's about thinking about what we're good at, which is what I was trying to allude to earlier, as humans, and what AI is good at as algorithms, and how to bring those two together as symbiotic teams, yes, so that they can tackle a very different set of problems that have higher degree of complexity. And then we work on intelligent assistance is another area. Basically more with an enterprise flavor, Obviously, we're part of Xerox Corporation. We do quite a bit of work for them. We think about enterprise, business workflows, and how can knowledge workers become more productive in getting their jobs done, and how to bring in that same realm of human-machine collaboration, how can we bring some intelligent assistants into that context so that they can get their jobs done much better. And then the last one I want to mention, which touches upon the robots idea. I think we don't call them robots, we call them systems. But this whole notion of machine intelligence, how do you enable machines, systems, robots, whatever you want to call them, to be better at sensing, thinking, and acting? And there's a number of mega trends in technology, which is sensing becoming ubiquitous and low cost and highly customized, and a lot of real-time data that is being generated everywhere from the Nests and drones and cars and other kinds of devices. How do you think about all of that, and how do you couple that with the new and state-of-the-art AI and machine learning algorithms, so that you can actually enable those machines to be better in sensing, thinking, and acting?
And you bring up how half of the conversation is about humans maximizing what we're really good at, and then robots and AI maximizing algorithms, what they can do repetitively that maybe we don't want to do.
Yeah.
So what has been kind of the answer for that?
Yeah, I think we're sort of in the early stages of really having that answer, but I think it's a little bit, maybe it's nuanced, but it's an important one. Is it's not so much I have a problem and let's break this down into pieces where a human can solve some subparts and a machine can solve some other parts of it. It's really thinking about it holistically, and how. That's why the word collaboration is really important, because we're not thinking about breakdown and assign one versus other. It's about how do I compose with the system together. Not I give it a task and it gives me an answer back, but can it help? Can we build off of each other? Can I? We talk about how do they learn? Learning also implies teaching, but it's a two-way street in our view, that we think that as humans we can teach AI agents, and AI agents can teach us. And we're also exploring that interplay between teaching and learning between these systems in this context of human-machine collaboration.
So this is actually really interesting. I'm really fascinated how much your experience in a completely different field aligns so perfectly with what I see in computational creativity. So one of the things, I think I could give a pretty good concrete example here. One of the things that machines are very good at is exploring the space of possibilities. One of the things that humans are very good at is being able to tell when you notice something good. So in case of Alicia, which is my focus, machines, at least if you create them well, are very good at coming up with many different options for you. So they can create little pieces of art, or they can create little melodies. And then a human, even a non-artist, can come back and tell whether they like the melodies or like the pieces of art and choose amongst them. So that's one way that you can task divide. Have the machine generate and have the human evaluate.
Yeah.
So this seems to be a field that I don't think many of us understand well, and you're just sort of starting to get into it, Maya, is how can robots or artificial intelligence be creative? It seems to be almost, where we just barely developed into creativity just recently in the evolutionary spectrum. How are we going to teach robots and AI to potentially be creative? Yeah, Piero, go first.
Well, it kind of goes back to what Piero was saying. In a way, we first need to break down what it is that we're talking about before we can decide whether a machine can do it. So when I teach computational creativity, we always start with what is human creativity. And it becomes very quickly very obvious that we can't grasp really what creativity is in us. And then what happens is that the moment that a computer does something that would be considered creative for a human, we very quickly redefine what creativity is to make sure that computers don't take it away from us. Computers have done a lot of things that would be considered creative for a person. They can paint. Their work has been exhibited in galleries. One of the most famous systems right now is a painting fool, whose goal is not to create art alone, but to actually be recognized as a legitimate artist. So its work, for example, has been commissioned for some very impressive sums of money. Its work is regularly exhibited in galleries, and that's an autonomous artist. It's not a co-creative system. And we have analogous systems to those in music, which are often co-creative as well. We have some of my colleagues work on jazz improvisation. So there is this amazing video of a human pianist collaborating with an autonomous piano. And they together create these beautiful pieces of music. So I think in a very real sense, computers are already creative. But of course, we're moving the bar. So right now, perhaps similar to transparency, we expect computer artists, or we want them to be able to explain what is the meaning behind their artwork. So that's one direction. And I really think that we're going to make progress. And of course, somebody's going to come around and say that's not enough, and that's going to give us a new challenge, and that's how the field moves forward. But definitely things are right now a lot further than I think most people are aware.
It's really interesting, so I'm going to build on something you mentioned. So part of the transparency, also in the context that we worked about, is about explainability. And it's a really interesting concept as well. I think EU is actually on its way to actually make it a requirement for these algorithms to be able to articulate and explain themselves. So that's really interesting if you combine it with what you said. I think creativity is a really interesting example because you cannot actually codify how it happens, but you can look at the output and then you can make a judgment about whether that was a creative, an output of a creative process or not. In the same way, if you think about, if you combine that with explainability, it's really interesting. Then you can actually, if you achieve that level of explainability, maybe it can actually help us get to the explanation of what creativity might mean by means of doing that.
So I'm also interested in that scientific kind of creativity. I've always been interested in how we come up with scientific theories. The paradigm shifts. Somebody comes up with the idea that gravitation, that the apple falling from the tree and the planets turning around the sun are the same thing, or Einstein's relativity. So, a little bit of history. One of the very early AI programs was the GPS, General Problem Solver, done by Simon and Newell, I think 1957. And at that time, they thought intelligence is mathematical logic. If you can solve a theorem of mathematical logic, you have human intelligence. Turned out that was the easy part of AI. And they quickly realized this. And in fact, I think in 1963, Simon himself had one of his students, I remember his name, work on analogical reasoning, trying to come up with a creative idea based on something that you know. And at CMU, that at the time was called Carnegie Institute of Technology, Walter Reitman objected, what you are doing, based on mathematical logic, is not what we do. The human mind is chaotic. The human mind continuously generates ideas. And then eventually one seems to fit and you go after that. Why that one? Well, sometimes it's just aesthetics. It just looks beautiful. Sometimes it just fits So that was the beginning of a branch of artificial intelligence. Now everybody talks about the success stories of AI. We have to write a book about the failures of AI. Because this branch of AI...
It's going to be a long one.
Which I call theory formation. How can you have a machine come up with a theory? Okay, I give you some data. Now don't just give me the pattern. Come up with a formula, like Newton's formula, okay? So that has been going on for a long time. 1963, that's why I was mentioning the date. Now it's 50-something years later. That's an extremely complicated problem, actually, turns out. How the human mind suddenly changes the view of the world and comes up with the idea, what, space-time is warped. Things like this.
Yeah.
There is some work happening at Georgia Tech where they're trying to intentionally mix different fields to try to make these discoveries automatically. So some of the greatest discoveries happen by looking at work in biology, to particularly understanding how different marine animals work, and then we can take that back into technology and build in analogous systems. And there is effort at various degrees of research to try to make this happen intentionally. So what's called conceptual blending. So it's well known that one of the best ways that creative ideas come about is by taking existing things and blending them, and they're trying to do that towards scientific discovery in an automated way.
And today, one field that is very interesting in this is biotech. I don't know what to call it, healthcare industry, whatever. Why? Because designing drugs and developing them is a long process. It's extremely expensive. You have to do so many trials, and each one costs a lot of money. If you succeed, besides making a lot of money, you save lives. Okay, so we started realizing we don't have enough drugs for people, even if we have so much, so many data. We can't come up with the drugs just because it's so complicated to come up with theories of how proteins work, how genes work, and so on. So now AI applied to scientific theory as a very practical application.
So AI is now permeating into almost every single industry. It's assisting people, it's reducing suffering, providing food, providing healthcare, so many different things. Well, what about the other side of AI, the side of AI that we can potentially unleash into a market to maximize our money? Who is going to be programming ethics into AI?
There's, interestingly, in the last couple of years, there have been so many new groups forming to discuss the ethics of AI and autonomous systems that it's clearly the time for it to be on everybody's agenda, all the way up to World Economic Forum. One of the things that fascinates me is I'm in the middle of the process in robotics where the pioneers tended to have ethical, well-designed systems because they had spent their whole lives building things. But what I see is as the first wave moves through, and the next generation and multiplies and does it much more with much less, I guess, training and thought. So I think we start to get a lot of careless, thoughtless products in the world. And I think that this is tipping point that we've reached algorithmically, where things that seemed like a good idea at the time start to seem not so great in practice. You know, bye-bye democracy, for example. But the questions that have been, how do you say, the answers that pretty much come up, even though in some cases the principles are 27 or 35 or 137, or in some only 3 or 4, center around the idea of transparency and accountability, because we can't even assign liability and responsibility if we can't explain exactly what just happened.
Could you please elaborate on bye-bye democracy?
I remember the days when we thought the internet was going to be untrammeled goodness, open and support something like democracy, which was the ability of everybody to have their voice heard. One of the reasons I became very interested in ethics and design of technologies broadly is I'm also old enough to have been knocked back for astronaut training when I sent my 10-year-old letter off to NASA because I was a girl. And to have been heard over and over in my life, growing up in my father's physics lab with my mother programming the university's mainframe computer, that's unusual for a girl. Mm-hmm. At a certain point in time, I started to find that what was most fascinating wasn't building the rockets and the robots, but was asking why doing that was unusual for a girl. And how we were coding and encoding all of our social formation into our technologies. And then what the impact of those encoded technologies was going to have in the feedback onto our society. And to see if we could start to work out where these patterns were developing and kind of head them off at the pass, as it were. I'm old enough to have seen the development of the first pages on the internet and the World Wide Web, and I could predict that that was going to be a rather macho, trollish environment, and I stopped mucking around on computers. I went back to study robotics and AI because clearly letting things go doesn't help us. We've got to be right in the center of what's happening to understand both the promise and the peril, to use a Victorian phrase. And I think it's very difficult for a startup to do something. It's much easier for a large company to do something. It's possible for us to create regulations, potentially even at global levels, not necessarily always to implement them. But one of the things is, as a society, we have, even if they're imperfect, many social frameworks already. What we need to do is harness the parts where we use those things and pay a lot of attention, I think. I'm a big fan of Kahneman's fast thinking, slow thinking. One of the things that's happening right now with our technology is that it's using a lot of our fast thinking systems rather than our slow thinking systems. And our economy is biased towards that kind of endorphin-like responsiveness.
Yep.
You know, even if we look at things like companies reporting to shareholders on quarterly basis, how can a company then develop technologies that are good for the world over a 50-year period? So all of our problems with AI and robotics, ultimately they come back to, as Norbert Wiener said, people problems. I love that he wrote back in 63 or 64 that the future isn't a comfortable hammock that we can lie back in and be waited upon by our robot slaves. It's an ever more demanding struggle against the limitations of human intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Really well said.
Yeah, well said. Is there other thoughts from you guys about AI ethics, maybe about artificial general intelligence posing an existential threat? I think that's a really important topic. I think the human race is so lucky to even have flourished on this rock orbiting the star in the first place. We only got here because the asteroid killed the dinosaurs. I mean, there's so many filters that are going to just eradicate us from this planet, just like, you know, 5 stars down the line already it happened to. AI seems like the next filter, so how do we get past that filter?
I might have sounded a little bit on the negative side, but I'm also techno-optimistic, because I just want to add, think at the pace of expansion of human knowledge, where only a few hundred years ago all of human encoded knowledge could be captured in one library, when people could talk about, could really explore every subject. And now I calculated how many years it would take me to read all of the books in the University of Sydney Library when I went back to study, and I realized that I wasn't even going to be able to keep up in my discipline, which is a splinter of a fraction of what that single university encompasses. And how many universities do we have? And how many, and you realize how essential things like this and search become. So we've become already augmented completely, but it is the way that we are now solving problems. So our definition of human has changed. We're all cyborgs right now. So let's enjoy that too.
I think really worrying about artificial general intelligence is premature, to say the least. Garry Kasparov, I think it was him, that the world chess champion, said, before we start worrying about what machines do, we should worry about what machines still cannot do, because they could do a lot more for the human race they are not doing. And the other thing, there's a lot of talk against Silicon Valley right now. This view that, let's talk automation, not artificial intelligence. It's as we said at the beginning, it's difficult to define. There's a lot of talk that what Silicon Valley is producing is somehow is going to be an existential threat for the human race. It's wildly exaggerated, and we risk missing the point that humans are still the #1 existential threat. So I think if you want to find an enemy of the human race, don't look at Silicon Valley, look at Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, right?
And in fact, these days, perhaps the #1 killer of people is people. Literally, whether it's by murder or suicide.
That might change though very soon.
At the moment,
it's already happening with autonomous drones.
That the rationale behind the military use of drones, and they've written a huge paper on the ethics of autonomous warfare, if anybody's seriously interested in that subject, is because it saves more American lives. So, you know, I try to avoid the ethics of warfare because it's kind of a tautology, but we have evolved a set of rules, and robots are far from the first existential technological threat that we've faced. Chemical warfare and nuclear warfare.
So this thing is extremely dangerous. It's collecting a lot of data about us all the time. You know, I would worry about this before I worry about.
And then all you need is an AI to parse that data about you, and then it can make some prediction about your life that you don't even know, and then use that as blackmail against you. There's so many.
On the cloud, there are hundreds of invisible robots that are looking at this data right now. So
yeah, what can we find in Piero's library of photos? Let's look. Just as a joke, we're friends.
There is a hypothesis that I heard recently that humans of the near future are going to become very comfortable with being constantly watched and listened to, and they're going to become just less sensitive to privacy. I'm not sure that's
we
going
already
to happen.
are constantly listened to. You have Google Home or Amazon Alexa inside your house. We have the maps. Yeah. Google Maps is constantly pulling data. You know all the tags on your emails. So, all right, let's talk about human capital changing. I think there's so many people in this room that have work that. Some people like their work, some people don't like their work. We see millions of jobs being automated across many different industries, from transit to just the service industry, retail industry. What's the essence of how human capital is going to change in the next 10 years? And what kind of work will we be doing, and what should we teach our kids?
So I'd like to comment on that, and I think it ties back to what Andrea was saying earlier. I think this is more of a social issue than it is a purely technological issue. I really doubt, primarily because of the things that were pointed out earlier, companies are under such enormous pressure to make profit that it's highly unlikely that they're going to both create the tech and find the social solutions for us. It is perhaps not entirely their place to organize our society. I don't think we even want them to. So as a society, we need to take responsibility and figure out what kind of world we want to live in as AI gets more and more sophisticated. The fear, unfortunately, is that we're going to see the same phenomena that we see far too often, where with any human advancement, the rich get richer, leaving more and more segments of society behind. For example, with autonomous driving, which I think fundamentally is such an amazing thing and is going to save many lives, truck driving is one of the most popular jobs out there. And what's going to happen to all of these truck drivers?
I've got to step in there as well, because and also on the point before, privacy is an incredibly recent concept that has only ever been possible for the wealthy in the last 100 years, or perhaps the middle class, shall we say. Everybody before that either lived in groups or was surrounded by people. So the fact that we worry about privacy now is actually is a very recent construct, shall we say. But going to the next issue is truck drivers, which, if you look not at the job stats for how many people have the job, look at the figures for how many job vacancies there are. And you'll find that vacant truck driving positions are more than vacant manufacturing positions. And there are a lot of vacant manufacturing positions. So when you really dive into it, the areas that are being let's say automated by machinery, because I think we've just seen a huge takeover of a lot of kind of white collar jobs through automation, through computerization. We worry a lot more about robots, and yet that's going to be a slower change. The physical infrastructures are a little bit harder to change, but the jobs, the incentive to put robots into jobs is because people are not doing those jobs, because human labor is cheap. And I can tell you, I listen to a lot of startup pitches. I've been involved in a lot of investment groups and mentoring, and if you take a pitch to any investor and you say, I'm going to replace a human, they'll go, well, come back with a scheme that's going to make money. You know, not only that, but human labor is infinitely replaceable in many ways. Okay.
Human labor is quite expensive.
Long term as opposed to migratory.
It's quite a large cost in terms of, it's probably third about of total cost. I mean, you can look at PARC. If you look at your balance sheets, if you look at Starbucks, if you look at truck drivers, they're a third of the cost of the company.
Okay. I do think we've got to worry about the inequalities in wealth separation, because if you dig deeper into the truck driver story as well, it's the same story as with taxi drivers. 10% of truck drivers and taxi drivers, perhaps a little bit more, own their own business. They suffer much more when it's an automated process or Uber comes in than the person who's working for part of a fleet. So it really comes down to the ability for our less well-off classes to have social mobility. I think that's not talked about a lot.
Yeah.
And that's where, if we can utilize robotics in the way, if we consider it like power tools for this next generation, and yet try and facilitate small businesses around, or artisanal businesses. It sounds a little bit strange to talk about automation and artisans, yet that's actually what can make cost-effective production in small batches in local areas possible.
But you try and take a truck driver or somebody that is a barista at Starbucks that knows a repetitive process, and you try and teach them how to become an artisan. You try and teach them how to do a creative problem-solving process that is not a 6-month retraining process.
Talk to every Starbucks barista. There's the ones that don't talk, and then there's the ones that talk and often see themselves as a creative artist. And the communication is something that you will not get when you automate that process. But I'm not saying that the jobs are safe, because again, human labor is the cheap part of the equation. What Starbucks spend the most money on is the real estate. So there is actually a trend right now, and it happened before robots. So this is where Chipotle is taking a large share of the retail takeout food business, because the footprint when you serve up food in that fashion is smaller than when you're doing a lot of the more traditional fast food type industry. So we're seeing a general evolution, and the cost saving comes from machines that can make processes possible in smaller footprints. And we've seen this with banks, with the spread of ATMs. And everybody said they're taking away the bank teller jobs, but there was actually a net gain, because banks were able to create many more branches offering the same services but with fewer people. So they opened more branches and employed more people. One of the other equations around robots and labor, sorry to belabor the point, is that in most studies of factories, primarily around automotive and consumer electronics, because that's where the most industrialization has happened, the factories that used robots lost some jobs, but became more productive, more successful, and employed more people. Where you are in danger of losing your job is actually in the factory that didn't automate, because it went broke and closed down, or sent the jobs to another country.
I think the history of automation taught this lesson for centuries. I mean, of course, I understand the concern. It's a real concern. The experiment with trucks has been done. In many Asian countries, they use trains. You know, United States is being left behind in this sense. So a lot of truck drivers in China today don't drive trucks. Yes, hopefully they do something else. China is a communist country, by the way. So I think there's a problem with automation in general. You look at the movies from the 30s and the 40s, you see these huge rooms full of people, typically women, typing on something called typewriters. The younger people here have never seen a typewriter. So it's always been that case. Now, in the case of automation that we have today, it gets a little more difficult to retrain people. That we have to admit that it is more complicated. China, in fact, which long story, but last year AI became an official national Chinese program sanctioned by the president. They have a president who believes in science technology. It's unusual, I know, it's surprising for us. So now they want to teach AI in primary schools. And this is not something I read in the news. My wife, Jingsha, is from China. She's working on some of these programs.
In primary school? In
primary school. So, of course, there is an issue there. But the issue is not new. Technology has always done that. It has already displaced workers. And the biggest tragedy is always people my age. Because if you are 25, 26, you can still adapt quickly to the new technology. If you spend your life working in trucks or whatever else, and suddenly you have to change job because your job is dying or your salary is going down, yes, I understand the concern. One more thing, I'm not an economist, but simple statistic, the European country with the highest density of robots is Germany. The Asian country with the highest density of robots is Japan, and the American country with the highest density of robots is the United States. Now, take a wild guess which are the countries with the lowest unemployment in each continent. Germany, Japan, USA. Now, it doesn't mean that everything is good. There's a lot of people whose salary has declined, income has declined, so just being employed doesn't mean anything. But it's not true that just automation destroys jobs. It also creates jobs.
Definitely.
Now, the question is, are they better or worse than what you had, and so on and so on. So,
yeah, I think there's a local scale and a more global scale of that, right? So clearly there's a set of tasks and jobs that are likely to be eliminated due to automation and AI and machine learning or whatnot. And then there are some others that are safer, perhaps. And then the local effect is those people that actually get, that feel the pain, if you will, that work in those tasks. But I want to kind of push back a little bit on something you said, Pierre. Is the age demographic is one thing, and I agree with what you said. But I think one thing that we're overlooking now, which actually amplifies the problem that we're facing, is the pace of technology. Yes, the technology has challenged us, and automation has challenged us to kind of rethink about all of this and reskill ourselves in a way that then, it created some jobs, but we were able to kind of catch up and reallocate where we deploy our skills as humankind. But that was done before, and I think the stark contrast from the history, from the past and now, is we're living in a world where there is not a single technological wave that's coming. We talk about AI here, but talk about AI and talk about IoT, talk about blockchain, and you put all of those together, it's changing so fast that those that are left behind and that gets displaced out of the workforce, the reskilling and retraining challenges at unprecedented levels because of that pace of technology. And that's what we need to think about.
I'd really like to comment on that. And I know I brought up the truck drivers, and thank you for qualifying the positive aspects as well. But I'm an educator, and I've worked at 2 public universities in the United States, and our education is already terribly underfunded. There are people who want to go to university and can't. There are so many issues. Whereas in Canada, I had 4-year training in computer science. There are universities here where the computer science training is essentially 2 years, which is not enough. It's not. And I watch over and over again students losing jobs to people who come from other countries, which of course in a way is great. But we should first be educating our own people. And AI is of course contributing to this issue both in positive and negative ways. But ultimately, it's a social issue. And we need to be putting funds towards educating our own people. And I think without that, we are going to see people who kind of fall out of the system.
Very well said. All right, shall we go ahead and open up for some questions from the audience? We have a hand up right there. Maybe let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
Yep. Oh, we're not supposed to talk.
Great job, everyone. I think we covered a lot of great topics. Yes.
Thank you very much. My favorite roboticist is Ridley Scott. And what's kind of interesting is that from the perspective of the early 70s, the visions presented in Terminator, and more importantly in my view in Blade Runner, are really about in smart machines, autonomous machines, and then biological computers, if you will. And what is the ethics of biological computers in the sense of Nexus 6? This was the year of the incept dates of the Nexus replicants. And Skynet, I believe, went intelligent, developed consciousness in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So
we're a little bit out in our predictions, but has anybody read Isaac Asimov's 50-year predictions that he wrote for the 1964 World Fair? He was pretty good.
Yeah.
I would invest in his stock.
But it's not that the predictions failed. All these predictions failed in a 30-year perspective. But the question I have is, given that as background, is we've moved, as your T-shirt clearly shows, from mechanical computers and card programming to electronics. Where is intelligence in biology, in wetware, if you will, and how will that affect the kinds of capabilities, the speed, and the ethical concerns that you have?
I think there are so many areas of interest that you've raised, and I think we're just putting the foundational stones together to start merging some of these areas. So a number of my friends do swarm robotics, and they tend to be more in the medical and mathematical fields, and yet that's being applied in robots. It's also being applied in cells. And biomimicry plays a really strong part in the development of robotic systems, and then the development of robotic systems feeds back and pays actually quite a lot. It feeds back into our research on how physical systems or biological systems work and operate. So there is cross-pollination, and it needs to continue. And in fact, one of my kind of theses is that in some fashions we've gender-coded electronics as male and organics as female. And one of the things that I notice is I don't push so hard to get women into robotics and electronics. I try to get them more into modeling, mathematics, and biochemistry, because I see that as perhaps being the next thing. If we're looking into, you know, future training and future proofing, let's not necessarily teach Arduino anymore. But that's a kind of big theory. Also, in terms of the films you raised, you probably will enjoy Ex Machina. Okay, a really great musing on the whole thing of human, but you also raised a really big point there, is that we always conflate artificial intelligence with agency. Okay, so the question should be not what can computers or artificial intelligence do, or what can't it do, but what on earth would it want to do? And I don't believe that currently our systems have anything near a biological imperative.
Who was next?
Somebody has to keep it hard to keep track. Alan, you're in charge of the...
Hi everyone, my name is Omar, also with Omar. We came from Dubai. I'd also like to announce that we also have now the first Minister of Artificial Intelligence. His name is also Omar.
Nice.
His name is Omar Al-Ulama.
So, we don't have one yet. We need one. We need a Minister of Artificial Intelligence.
That's exactly the reason why we want to try to be #1 in establishing AI across all government services to its people. So excellent discussion. I'm also a writer, so I'm writing my second book, and this is the reason why Omar and we came here, because we want to collect a lot of this content for the book, which is about AI and everything else that you just mentioned. My question, sir, was regarding AlphaZero. You said that it was technically, stupid. It could only do one thing, maybe just play chess or play AlphaGo. But then think of Google itself. Like right now, we feed it so much information about so many different topics. Isn't it becoming super intelligent, and only God knows what's in the moonshot lab? that they talk about. They say it's completely confidential. But so do you not think that the machine could probably do a lot of different things, that we're constantly feeding it information every single day on different topics? Just asking.
That's actually a very complicated question because it sounds like a simple question, but it really goes back to the definition of intelligence. What is intelligence? See, in the 70s, 80s, we were building expert systems. The idea was we build a machine that will give answers to complicated questions, like medicine, okay? I have these symptoms, tell me what I should do now, what do I have, and so on. That program failed, one of the many failures. The program failed for many reasons, but one reason is very simple. You Google it. You don't need to have all this intelligence in a machine to give the answer. You just Google and you find somebody who posted the, well, unfortunately you find a lot of people now. Now you find too much. Yep. Okay, so if you look at the whole universe, the Google search engine is searching. Is that an intelligent system? That goes back to the definition of intelligence. If to you intelligence is just something that does what a human does, yeah, then the whole web is intelligent. But of course, if you think in terms, is it conscious, then probably it's not conscious. So the question is actually very complicated because first you should have we would have to define intelligence, and nobody has that definition.
I would answer your question by saying that yes, it is absolutely insanely important for us to better understand what actually is going into that system every single day. Millions and millions of different searches and inquiries for different people that they can log and pin, that this person's asking about this medical condition and this person is traveling to China this many times. All the sort of information, what is actually being done with it, how can we maximize human potential with it, not destroy people with it, all of that important stuff.
This is where the discussion happened between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. Because Elon Musk is saying it can be crazy and intelligent and go and but this is unless it was a PR.
It absolutely can, especially if it's running on an open platform. It absolutely can. If your objective is to maximize funds, which for so many people on the planet is their objective, and you let it loose cannon out onto the financial markets or whatever system you want, there is a major problem with something like that.
Okay, I feel a need to organize this a little bit. We can't go around saying that just because Google has a lot of information that it can search, that makes it incredibly intelligent. Okay? Granted, it's an incredible accomplishment in its own right, because we all know that they had this super sophisticated algorithm for search, and then eventually, I'm not sure exactly what they're doing now, but at a certain point, the best search results were the search results that people who typed exactly the same query found useful. Okay, so having a lot of data is helpful, of course. Of course, it's an incredible accomplishment to have everything together.
On you. You log in with your Gmail account and you search and you have a calendar and you have Google Maps and you have all
Yeah, that's not
things.
amazing to me. Just collecting information, right? We can make lots of great things in searching and apply some machine learning so that it can personalize the results to me. Okay, still, that doesn't make it a system that has different forms of intelligence. It just has lots of data, okay? It's still task specific. All AI right now is task specific. We don't have anything remotely resembling general intelligence. Okay, so just I wanted to separate having information on different topics versus having different kinds of cognitive abilities that are coming together. Okay, I hope that was helpful.
I guess back there. And then let's take this middle. You've had your hand up a couple times. Yeah, let's go to you next. Next.
Okay, so if you look at the evolution of technology, you know, if somebody holding a sword in the 1600s would be the equivalent of owning a Ferrari today, right? It was beyond your reach, right? And if you look at how someone had a computer, that if you walked around with a book, that was something that was really technologically advanced, equivalent to now just having a paper book. It kind of goes from someone who has a lot of money to own down to something that's just very ubiquitous. There's writing on everything, whereas before, if you could write, that was unbelievable. So if you take AI, right now, if you take AI and just say a drone or something that looks like a dog from Boston Robotics, and it's very expensive, where does this panel see in the next few years? What happens when it's ubiquitous down to the point where everyone can own it, the average person can own it? Where does this panel see that going, and what do you think that world will look like?
I think one of the things that we have to watch is that right now our world's organization, the leading organizers of information are making their money on advertising. We've seen a huge change in the last 100, 150 years from being a society that was concerned with production of goods, particularly, say, starting at food and then manufacturing other physical goods, to being one that's about organizing information. Yet, the way that we choose to make use of that, the way that we fund the use of that, is through selling us things. And I think that we need to somehow go well beyond discussions about universal basic income and start to really, I think we have an opportunity right now to even change the debate from work. I mean, why shouldn't work be something we enjoy?
In terms of technology scaling down in cost until everyone has like a Boston Dynamics dog, where everyone has the newest Magic League augmented reality and things like that, I think that we will eventually get to a point like that, and that's going to be tremendously impactful, especially for people that are of low socioeconomic status once it's a couple $100s to afford something like that versus the tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars for things like that. It's something to keep in mind, and we'll probably end up having many more discussions like this across the next couple of years, is the difference in social stratification and speciation potentially of socioeconomic statuses. I do firmly believe that if we're not having a global conversation about the potential split that we're going to have in terms of 8 people right now own as much wealth as the bottom 4 billion people on the planet, that those, you just remember that it's the people that can own the artificial intelligences and the genetic engineering and the colonization of space are the ones that will just straight up do that without the potential looking back. Why would I not want to purchase a 3rd space station for myself rather than hire 50 people on Earth to solve a problem? So there's all these conversations that I love having about the future that I really want to make more popular.
And that actually makes sense of my answer to your question, which is, these days or in the future, is it really going to matter if we've seen the democratization of technology occur in something like drones, where, you know, for $3.4 billion you can have an autonomous satellite, then you can go down to, you know, $300 million and you can get a Predator drone, then it dropped down and for, you know, $1 million you could have something else, and then for $10,000 you could have a drone that was, you know, professional grade, dropped down to hobbyist drones, and now you've got little micro drones that are under every Christmas tree and sold in every shopping mall. But the thing is, nobody has done anything useful with any of the drones below a certain level. So what was the point? And many people, there was an entire investment bubble around it where people went, well, yes, why? Physical technologies have scale issues, and the things that have the greatest impact, like you talked about writing, it's a technology that had a network effect in the same way that many of our communication technologies have. And what people haven't harnessed yet with, say, drone technology is having some sort of network effect capability, whether it's manipulation or an information one. And these things are still to come. So the spread of the technology is often quite separated from the real impact of the technology.
Yeah. Augmented reality is the future of education. In 2 to 5 years, when every single person is able to afford a pair of Magic Leap augmented reality glasses, and they're able to potentially retrain from fields that are being automated in just a couple of months or even a year or 2 years, you can potentially become an artist or a creator of some sort, of solving some major problem rather than doing a repetitive task. I think that that's going to be a major equalizer to technologies like that. And then I think the middle question. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking the last question with the wealthy people, and then also because there's been discussion about, China having a stake in AIs and other countries, do you see there's a possibility for like a new space race against with like who's getting the AI first, who's getting the best robots first? And is it going to be between countries, or is it going to be between the ultra-rich people?
That's happening.
I think we're all nodding and saying it's already happening. I think
Who's winning?
Well,
it's too early to say.
China, big time. I mean, the what is it? Arnold Foundation. So there are 4 or 5 top competitions in AI. The last 12 months, the Arnold Foundation competition, the ImageNet, which is the most famous, the Coco, which is Microsoft, then 4 or 5, all of them. Look at the winners. They're all Chinese teams. Period. And it's a national program. So as you can imagine, China right now is investing, is flooding universities with money and so on. We can discuss forever about who is more creative, who is not more creative. But in terms of the number of engineers that they're producing, they dwarf the US. And even before this, 2015, I think, I look up the data about STEM graduates. China is 10 times more than the United States. Even considering the population, it's still a lot more.
It's still more, because that would mean we have 3 billion
I mean,
people,
and AI, at the end of the day, is computational math. So they're graduating a lot more. 2016 was an important year in deep learning, but not because of AlphaGo, because it was the first year that China produced more papers in AI than the United States. So, and you know, we can argue why. My wife is Chinese, is standing in front of me, so I can't really get into politics. She's a Chinese journalist.
It's beyond AI as well. You know, interesting things. It was predicted to happen in 2019. It's already happened. China is purchasing and producing more of the world's robots than any other country. And the only reason it's not featuring on the most dense roboticization, really, like Germany, Japan, and Korea, and the USA, is the per capita ratio. Because if you look at the total, they're ahead of everybody now. And that's what you can do. But in terms of, say, the space race, we've seen a transition from a space race that had to be the province of governments to being one that is a private enterprise, because the cost of the technology has decreased. And last year, to my great pleasure, because I'm a quasi, which is a Kiwi Aussie, New Zealand started launching satellites. Okay? Who would ever, when I grew up wanting to be an astronaut, never in my wildest dreams did I think that New Zealand was going to be launching rockets. And now even Australia's got an agency, a space agency, and they only just got it this year.
So I just want to make one contrast, I think, to the previous question. I think we danced around definitions of intelligence and what's artificial intelligence. I think that the crux of that question is what winning means, and you have to define what winning means. While everything that's said about China and other parts of the globe are true, the space race was different. There's a stark contrast because the objective was very, very clearly articulated. Put a man on the outer orbit, and who does that first wins. I don't think we know clearly, at least I don't, what winning in AI really means. I believe, is it publishing more academic papers or putting more, creating more companies? So I think it's a constant debate. China is doing a lot of really, really important things that feel right, and you need to be putting emphasis on that at all levels, etc. But I think it's too early to declare who has won that race.
Yeah,
so.
That's a very good point, actually. But my concern is not so much who's going to win between China and US. Unfortunately, I think I already know who's going to win. But I agree with him that it's difficult to, that depends how you define win. My concern is all the other countries. See, we already live in a world where there's a huge gap between Silicon Valley and, I don't want to name countries, pick a country in Africa, Latin America, whatever. The gap is colossal. I mean, it used to be a gap between a country that has 1,000 cars and a country that has only 5 cars. But now we have AI, virtual reality, 3D printing, Biotech, and so on and so on and so on, and they don't. And tomorrow we'll have how many thousands of deep learning systems and whatever, and they don't. So the gap between those 2-3 countries, which is really US, China, Japan, Europe, Singapore, but the big ones is really just 3 or 4, and the rest of the world. That's a huge gap where, you know, a country in Africa can never catch up. So my concern is not so much who's going to win between the powers, is what happens to 90% of the other countries.
Exactly. Yep. All right, who's had their hand up? I think you've had your hand up quite a while. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll bow for tonight. So.
Okay. I wanted to direct this at Professor Piero. I hope I got that pronounced correctly. I wanted you to, one of my great heroes, and is one of your countrymen, the original inventor, artist, whatever you will, I think has been, you might say, done some artificial intelligence in his day, and that would be the great master Da Vinci, who put all these things together, and you could go down the inventions, which were political, well, more than political, they were used in artillery and so on and so forth, which had a certain amount of artificial intelligence, you might say. Could you take his position, and by the way, all of his was driven by human creativity. Could you respond as if it were him, as how he might see this issue today?
So you want me to pretend I'm Leonardo da Vinci?
Yeah, let's do that.
This would be a great idea. It's like somebody asking you if you were Einstein. It's okay. It's okay. I suspect a lot of these people, starting with Alan Turing, would be disappointed. That's always been my feeling. I gave a talk at USF at Alan Turing's, what was it? 100th anniversary, I don't remember. And in my presentation, I would say Alan Turing would be disappointed, because I think we tend to go down the route of practical things. That's what really happens. You know, as I said, AI has many failures. The failures of AI are the most interesting things. Like Leonardo was both creative in art and science. Oh my God, they're so complicated, even for us humans, imagine for a machine. So what we tend to build is practical tools. And we are very far from having anything that is real creativity. The other reason that many of these great people would be disappointed is us human beings. As we use technology, we tend to lose something about the human creativity. You know, the simplest example is when you follow the navigator, and now you see people following the phone, the smartphone, inside a shopping mall. It has become too complicated to ask somebody, excuse me, where's the store? Right? You just follow the machine. I don't think that Leonardo would be very impressed with the human beings that we have today. With the technology, I mean, some of his inventions have been implemented. So he would just ask us, why did it take you so long?
On the other hand, as new technology becomes available, new forms of creativity become possible. There's a whole field of sound design which is now accessible to everybody because we have things like GarageBand, which didn't exist before. Of course, it simplifies and perhaps even trivializes certain things that would require a whole band of musicians before. It gives and it takes away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go back here.
Yeah, very interesting discussion and very broad, I must say. But you leave me confused between automation and artificial intelligence. To me, you know, your example of an automatic transmission, to me, that's not artificial intelligence. I mean, is it learning anything about, you know, your behavior? At least today, I don't think so. So
depends if it's a Tesla or not.
Do they have AI in the... No,
AI.
it's an electric motor, so there's no transmission.
So AI doesn't have to
Technology within it that is learning.
So anyhow, but you get my point here. So to me, there's a huge difference between automation, which is kind of a pre-described process that's taking place, and artificial intelligence, or whatever, however you define it, but something that learns, that takes data and learns out of those data, and that then does something different. And then here comes the transparency, of course, right? So you have not helped me understand that part better, I must say.
Out of the discussion, what's clear is that most artificial intelligence doesn't really learn, okay? And most autonomous systems or automation these days does sense and think. So we have thinking rather than learning here. And we have thinking and sensing here in automation. It is a spectrum. And there's a lot of things that still pass as robotics that now they're really stupid, okay? But technically, it passes. And let's just leave it at that end of the spectrum of automation, up to things that are just nowhere near human capability, except in very narrow specializations. Whether we're talking about a robot arm that can move 500 pieces a minute and put them exactly in the same place every time, or whether we're talking about the calculations that allowed to successfully play Go for using artificial intelligence, but it's not the learning that we think of.
Can we put that on a spectrum again? There was thinking and sensing, and then there was learning.
Yeah, well, we have perception-based, and then we have manipulation-based, and we have what I would still call calculation-based thinking, rather than the whole nuanced spectrum that we have. You can elaborate on this much more.
If you just look at it historically, one of the oldest approaches to AI were expert systems, which had no learning whatsoever. All it did was put a process into a computer, and it let it do it perhaps faster, perhaps a little bit better, but more or less the same way the human would have been able to do fundamentally. But nowadays, AI and machine learning are becoming synonymous because of the way industry is viewing it. AI is a lot more broad than machine learning. And so we can have AI without having learning, without having data, because we had AI for decades beforehand. That being said, I agree with you, actually, that the boundary between computer science in general and AI specifically is a little bit blurred.
In automation, and I just want to add one more dimension. Actually, the way I think about this is sense, think, or compute, act, and create. Right, or design, you could call it that as well. And the more you have combination of those things done by an agent, the more we can think of it as more intelligent. So there's always going to be different combinations of those kinds of capabilities in systems of the future. But I think the hard thing is to bring it all together in an integrated fashion. And the more there is, you're on this side of the spectrum as opposed to sort of pure automation side of the spectrum.
But I'm confused too. I'm very confused because I keep meeting startups that tell me I'm doing artificial intelligence, and I keep asking questions until I figure out they're just using statistics. So
which we've known for.
which is a form of machine learning. But,
yeah.
Awesome. All right. Tolga, do you want to close out by speaking about PARC for a little bit?
Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to thank you, Alan, for moderating.
Well, thank you, guys.
A great conversation and a dialogue. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed it just as much as I did, and my fellow panelists. So I just want to thank everybody for coming, and maybe put another quick note and announcement for our next event. We do these regularly. Our next event is going to be on March 22nd, and our innovation services group would be speaking about how we explore, our approach in exploring technology before it even exists. And I think that's just going to be another fascinating night to talk about that interesting topic. So again, thank you for coming, and hope to see you with us next time.
Thank you, everyone.